So when you got in, I was just wondering who were the guys you hung out with? And were you pleasantly surprised by who they were? Or were you disappointed, or were you just like, yeah, these guys are as bad dudes as I thought they were? And
It's all over. Yeah, it's such a good question, and I really appreciate it. So it's all over the place. I mean, the first thing is that people who have this pharma bro, perception of me, which we talked about earlier, is like humorously ridiculous. I'm obviously not a frat bro of any kind. I grew up in Brooklyn, so all my friends were minorities growing up, and people would just assume like I wouldn't fit into prison. But like the day I got there, I became friends with everyone. Like I never once had a problem with anyone in prison, so it was great. Now, of course, prisoners, especially in federal prison, or I mean, in any prison really, are not like necessarily nice or well-adjusted people. Like I said, there are a number of people who are sociopaths, a number of people who have severe mental health issues, but there are also a really number of awesome people. And I have like at least a couple dozen friends from prison I plan on being friends with forever. And again, a lot of people who made mistakes, a lot of people who had a bad childhood. I had a sort of rough childhood, and I think some of the issues I had over the long run were caused by that. Every biography I read of guys like Paul Allen or Steve Wozniak or Bill Gates or whomever, like they had these awesome idyllic childhoods, and I think there is something to having two parents and having something to not seeing domestic violence in your house like I did or whatever it is. Like everyone in prison, every single person that I met in prison, which is like 5,000 people, had some fucked up childhood where they had one parent, no parents, two parents who were drug addicts, whatever the case may be. And it's a really sort of sickening, as I said earlier, to see this community of people, especially minorities and really awesome people, kind of get fucked up by life and then end up, whether it's leaving school or having difficulty in school and then turning to another form of income, which is typically involves drugs and guns. And we have prisons just full of people that are minorities that in essence are you know casualties of the war on drugs. And it's fascinating to me that to see that like the real victims are the families of these people, that end up sort of having to suffer with the prisoner too. And the sentences are like three times longer than they need to be. And I'm not saying like it's important to like these people shouldn't be punished, or that it's good to have heroin flooding the streets, because it's not. But at the same time, like I don't think the answer is um, you know, throwing people in jail and forgetting about them. I think the answer is solving the root problem. Like I think companies, as I said, like Microsoft and Google and Facebook, need to hire people from these communities. They need to lift them up. Like every person I met in prison, like their idol or their role models were all pretty messed up. Like they were not people like my role model growing up was Bill Gates. My dad told me about Bill Gates. I thought it was really cool. I wanted to be a programmer. I started programming, and I sort of fell into finance by accident. But the point is, like, I had the right role model, and I think a lot of the role models in these communities just don't exist, and they ended up getting filled in these sort of weird power vacuums by people who misguide these folks, and it's really just terrible to see. So I did my best to sort of make friends with people, and it was really amazing to meet some really insightful people, really smart people. Intelligence has nothing to do with accomplishment, right? I mean, you're born with a set of cognitive faculties and function that is sort of with you for a long time. And so many people I met in prison are brilliant, but they some of them didn't finish high school or college or anything. And to take those people and put them into on the right track is really difficult, because you have this issue of, okay, well, if a guy is just learning HTML, or we can put him in a class, but is that really, or a boot camp, but is that really going to get him to a job, especially if he's sort of lacking in all kinds of other. And I'm using the he just because prisoners are overwhelmingly male, but there's certainly female prisoners too. So whatever they, you could sort of help to course correct them, but ultimately I think it's a really tricky problem, and I think it has to be addressed sort of earlier on. So yeah, I have dudes in here that are like my best friends, and I'm gonna hang out with forever. I don't want to hang out with people who have like a really terrible criminal mindset, obviously. So I'm pretty selective about who I want to spend time with. Like there are people in prison. In fact, I would say the majority of prisoners are going to be recidivists. They're addicted to a life of crime. It's really hard to break that cycle for them. But the guys that really do want to like stop committing crimes and never wanted to do it in the first place, and they've sort of seen the light, I think that, you know, um, uh, I want to help them. We actually had a really funny little group, I guess I'll tell you about in prison. It was sort of tongue in cheek, but we called it Crypto Thugs. And in essence, yeah, we were just like a bunch of guys that talked about crypto. And I spent a lot of time just um, teaching them about like what cryptography was and how key pairs worked and asymmetric, cryptography and all things like that, and why Bitcoin is anything, why it even matters, like why is it useful, why is it interesting. And I had these guys in like total rapture. Like these are dudes that like had probably, done some really horrible, unspeakable things, guys that have been in prison a long time, but had them like sitting and listening for hours about the most mundane things. Like I mentioned earlier, when I showed a friend binary and then octal and then hexadecimal, he would like constantly come back to my cell and he's like, man, my mind is blown. Like, I can't even believe I never learned how this stuff worked. Number systems and computing are so fascinating. And he was like so smart. I assume like he'd be in a different life. He'd be a tremendous programmer. He could be Mark Andreessen, but or maybe Brendan Ike. But in any event, my hero. But in any event, that's sort of that to answer your question, hopefully.
Did you say a dozen guys?
Yeah, it was a pretty big group, and we even made a little like Crypto Thugs logo and signed it. I think I mailed it home, so I'm gonna put it on Instagram someday.
I feel like they paid better attention than Wall Street Bets, actually.
Oh, hands down, yeah. Wall Street Bets is yeah. Well, you know how it is. I did want to say one thing about jail that's kind of interesting and about politics. I was the only like woke person in prison, which is really bizarre because I'm supposed to be the anti woke guy. So one of the really weird things about prison is that everyone believes in conspiracy theories. Everyone's anti LGBT except maybe the LGBT community in prison, which of course exists. Um, and I just wanted to point out that really strange dichotomy where I was like telling people, "Hey, you can't say this word. It's the wrong word." And they were like, "What are you talking about? That's what this person is." And they used a disparaging term, often used or previously often used, thankfully not used very often anymore, for gay people. And I would try to like reason with them and explain that to them. And we had a lot of trans people in prison, and you would get these horrible comments from people that were like, "Oh, I hope that person dies," or "I would kill that person," or something like that. And I was like, "Dude, what are you talking about?" And I would have to like sit down with these guys who were like violent or crazy or both, or whatever, and just sort of walk them through like the whole idea.
I have to notice that you seem like really well adjusted, um, and kind of like exactly yourself. And I was just curious, spending 6 years in prison and, like, what was like the time like, and, how did you keep your mental health up? And, how did you deal with isolation and, some things that us degens deal with? And just curious what that journey was like for you.
Sorry, I was sort of paying attention to the chat. I didn't know I could chat while I was in here, so I just started harassing somebody in the chat. Um, yeah, I mean, if you want to talk shit in the chat, just sign up for a speaker and come do it to me and let me know, just how smart you really are. But it's easy to throw shots. And again, this is why Twitter is toxic, but Spaces isn't, because it's really easy to have the guts to type something and not and behind a pseudonym, but it's pretty hard to come here and go toe to toe with me. So I, advise you to come and try your best if you can.
Where's the are these just DMs, Martin?
Yeah, yeah,
Or is
no,
there
no, I
Yeah,
guess
yeah.
there's a simultaneous chat. And again, I'm not upset. I'm just sort of having fun. But again, I would encourage anyone who wants to come here and troll me to do their best. You will meet your match in my estimation. But your question is based on this assumption again that prison is this disorienting, terrible experience, and it is, of course, to some extent, but it's not as disorienting and terrible as you might think. And I think that that's the first thing to understand, and that's almost a problem to some extent, that we've incarcerated so many people that like it's become a norm. Like 1 out of every 4 African American males will end up in prison. at some point in their life. I mean, how crazy is that? Like how could like just how could that not boggle your mind, right? And the fact that we've like made these prisons like to a point where it's like comfortable and like you expect to go there and oh, it's I'm just doing a little bid. You know how many times I've heard that people would say, "Oh, what's your sentence?" 7 years. Oh yeah, it's pretty good. Not so bad. And it's just remarkable how easy it is to acclimate to an environment as well. So I did 4.5 years almost exactly. It wasn't that bad. It wasn't good. I do think the longer you do, the less likely you are to come home and actually like be functional. So I think it's a really terrible thing when somebody gets 10 or 20 years and they basically are going to be disabled for the rest of their life, I think, and have a really, really hard time reintegrating and readjusting. So I don't know, man. I still have, this is my third day. So, we still have some time and we'll see just how much I've changed. Hopefully I've changed for the better. Even I'm not too proud to say that I have a lot of flaws, and I hope that I can come out of this a better person. Like I said, it doesn't mean I'm not going to stick up for what I believe in. It doesn't mean that I'm going to cower before government or any other so-called authority. I'm still going to be who I am from that perspective, but I hope to be a little bit more thoughtful about the way I portray myself and stuff like that. So appreciate the
Do
question.
they, I have a quick intermediary question here. So, when you actually leave the prison itself, is it like in the movies where they give you all these items from 5 or 6 years ago or something, and this sort of thing? And how do they arrange? Can you arrange for transportation away from the prison, or you just kind of have to like stand there, or people come pick you up? How does that work?
Yeah, I don't think it's a great use of time to go into it, but basically, yeah, you can arrange your family to pick you up, which is what happened here, and
Right,
you
right.
don't.
I was just curious, but
Yeah, it's not
uh,
exactly like the movies, but it's pretty close, I'd say.